My wife and I have two beautiful daughters biologically. We have one son that we adopted. And I thought I was a certain kind of dad when I only had daughters. And what happened was, like, these ladies came into my life and my experience, these daughters, and it was just so amazing. And going through the adoption process, my wife said, do we want to have a son or do we want to have a daughter? And another. And I said, I really don't have a preference. And she said, really, you don't? This is the time we get to choose. And I thought about it and I said, well, yeah, I think I'd like to have a son. And what has happened is that all of the negative self-talk that goes on comes out when I talk with my son in a way that it never happened with my daughters. And, there's that expression like, oh, that kid really pushes my buttons or whatever else. Well, I just feel like with my daughters, maybe like there was a button, but around my son, I feel like I'm just one big walking button. And, here's this gorgeous gift, this young prince of Ethiopia coming into my experience. And sometimes it's not even what I'm saying, it's how I'm saying it. Like I might be saying, hey, Remy, it'd be really wonderful if you could please
be entirely
put the
different.
cat back. Yeah, be entirely different. Exactly. And that's right. Be entirely different. Yeah. And shape your experience so that all of my conditions are met the way they're supposed to be met.
It would be so nice if you could just be a condition that I could love easily. Right. And therefore sort of put off for a little while the expansion that you and I planned before you were born. Now, there is an easy way of explaining it, which is never the route we take. We always take the path of least resistance. And so this is the easiest way for you to hear this. It is as simple as this. With your daughters, you didn't have as much relating. But here's this young boy, you're relating more. And so as you observe him, you are activating more of your own resistance that you picked up along your physical trail, that you thought was dormant and gone, and may have been dormant, but nothing is ever really gone, because you have the possibility of reactivating things anytime. And so can you feel that that's sort of what's going on?
Yes. Now,
tell us a little bit about, if you want to, about what you remember about your own childhood.
Ooh.
And maybe you can figure it out right here while we're visiting with you, how some of it is similar to what's going on there. In other words, are you following what we're getting at?
Yeah, for sure. So
you weren't all that controllable, were you?
No.
You were a very strong freedom seeker, and so you were testing boundaries.
Yes.
Is that familiar?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, because Scooby-Doo is better than yard work. Yeah. So my dad, pretty young guy, when I came along, I have a memory of him being under the car. He's a mechanic, and he's on the creeper, which I always thought was the coolest thing. You slide out of the car. And he says to me, and I'm at the time, maybe I'm 9, 10, and he says, go get me the 5/16 wrench. So I go in the garage, and there's that row of wrenches. I know what a wrench is. I'm not so sure what a 5/16 is, And so I grab one that I think looks pretty good, and I bring it back to him. And in a very exasperated way, he looks at me and he says, you're useless. Like this big global statement of like, you're just the worst. So you leap forward and you say, gosh, there's some things I'm never going to say to my kid. One, I'm not going to say you're useless. That was because it hurt my feelings. Or a 5/16. Yeah. Right. Or make yourself useful, or these kinds of things. I'm not going to say those things. So what do? I say the words, more uplifting, encouraging words.
That mean the same thing.
That mean the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And the energy is, you're useless, or.
Let's talk about, just for a moment, because this is the path of least resistance. Let's talk about what your father was really saying to you. What your father was saying to you, he really did not mean you are useless. Mm-hmm. What he meant was, I am overwhelmed and I need some help, and you don't seem to be it right now. What he really meant was, I need some help, but I have not the time or the energy or the inclination to teach you how to intersect with me. In fact, I don't really even want to teach you this because I don't really wish this for you. Not in the long term. So what he was saying was not about you. It was about how he was feeling in this moment. He wanted something useful, but could not find it. And don't you all have those experiences sometimes where you really wish that you'd taught someone to do this or this or this, but teaching them to do it would take so much more time than you have right now. And it doesn't seem that you can ever carve out that time. And so you keep doing more than you really have time to do, which sort of makes everybody else feel useless. Don't you find yourself saying, never mind, I'll just do it myself. I'll just do it myself, which they can take personally as if there's something wrong with them. I will do this myself and they hear, because you're not capable of doing it, when what you mean is, I'll do it myself because I have not taken the time, or I do not feel capable. I've not imbued you with this knowledge. And isn't this some of the same thing that's happening with you? Is that in the same way that your father, he could have taken the time to show you the difference in the wrenches and eventually taught you a lot about what was going on. But the only thing that was fun about that was the creeper.
Yeah.
The only thing that was really pleasurable about that was that.
Yeah.
And don't you find yourself feeling sort of ill-prepared to guide your son, your daughters too, to a certain extent, to all that you would like them to know? And you know why you feel that way? Because it's not your job. It's not your job to learn it all so that you can pass it on. And it was not your father's job to know it all so that he could pass it on. And it's certainly not your job to know it all so that you can pass it on. So if you could just let yourself off the hook a little bit. But we don't think that you're really going to go too far at letting yourself off the hook until you let your dad off the hook. Because the truth is, he was doing the best that he knew how to do. And while by today's standards it was not that good, there's not one grandparent that did good in today's standards. They don't even know how to use the mobile devices. Really. Esther's grandchildren love her. Love her. And find her so inadequate when it comes to technology. And every now and again, Esther has the desire to sit down with them and say, all right, kids, you're just going to sit with me here for a day. No, for a week. No, for a month. And I'm going to tell you everything I know about everything. And you're going to be so impressed with everything that I know. And if she were to say that to them, they would say, no, we won't. We won't be impressed because every leading edge is new. Yeah. And so the best you can do as a parent, it's not about teaching the techniques of life. It's not about teaching the 5/16 from the whatever else there is on the rack. It's about teaching through the clarity of your example what your true state of happiness is. And so as you remember that is your really singular goal as a parent, to show as best you can, as often as you can, your alignment. And that's why we're having this conversation. We don't think that you really feel a need to give so much knowledge to guide, is that you can't stand it when you can feel yourself standing in a place where you don't mean to stand. You can feel when the fullness of you is flowing through, and you can feel when, for some reason, the fullness of you is being pinched off. And we just want you to hear this one really important thing. You're not pinching it off because of anything that this young man is doing. You're pinching it off because of your perspective of what your father was doing. It's got so little to do with him and so much to do with your relationship before, which is what we were talking about as we began here today, because we were talking about how life causes you to desire things and then you kill them with your beliefs. Well, where did you get your beliefs? A belief is just a thought that you continue to think. In most cases, your beliefs are just your response to life experience. So you were responding to a lot of life experience as that young boy growing up with that insecure father. Not always insecure, but much of the time. Unworthy feeling and insecure. Certainly not in concert with his own inner being in the way that you've learned to be. But your father could be out of connection and not suffer from it. In other words, he could say those words to you and he didn't suffer from it as much because he was not practicing the high-flying vibration like you are. You can't go back. You can't disallow the fullness of who you are flowing and ever feel good. And when you don't feel good, you're associating it with whatever is present when you don't feel good, which brings about a sort of natural blame. And then you start playing all of those silly games with yourself. We know you do, and it would be so natural to do it. Well, maybe it's because he's not a biological child. It is our promise to you that your potential for alignment with this child is every bit as great, if not more. The choosing was stronger, even, you see, stronger. It's going to be great, and it's going to suck. Depending on where you are. Yeah. Enough?
Yes. Thank you.
You want to talk about anything in more detail, or is that satisfying enough that it'll be...
I'll be chewing on that one for a long time. Thank you.
It'll be obvious as you move along. Just remember, you want to be tuned in, tapped in, turned on, and you want that for him. But it's not your job for him to do it, only your job for you to do it.
Okay, all right. There's a little more. My wife, again, was me in Cancun, and she and I both loved the thought of staying in your lane, right? The analogy of like, okay, if you're driving along at night and you start getting towards the edge, you hit the rumble strip, right? There's like this warning system built in.
And how you have this natural inclination to correct it right away.
Right away, right? And so with me, like when I'm in that aligned place, I'm feeling happy and centered and choose any word you want. I feel like I have like all these options available to me. Remy, he's being a little louder than maybe he could be at the restaurant, but maybe I can use humor. Maybe I can redirect it in some way. Maybe I can engage with them over color, anything, call it. But if I've gotten out of my lane, if I've gone to anger, or frustration, then those choices go from here to just like, well, maybe I'll try yelling, And so I'd like to get to a place whereby I'm more cognizant of the rumble strip sooner and not just like immediately into the ditch.
You follow the analogy. You know where you belong in your lane when you're driving. And you've been doing it long enough that it's second nature. And so that's the part that we want to shine a spotlight on right here, is that in that analogy, of course you hear the rumble strip, but there's something bigger that is present within you before you heard that rumble strip, and that is your overall intention to not occupy the same space as another vehicle or to move nicely through traffic. In other words, you have this larger intention that has been in place for a very long time that now this rumble strip is playing against. So the rumble strip is an insignificant little piece of guidance in the context of your greater intention of safety and living happily ever after and enjoying the day and getting to where you're going. You see what we're getting at? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about your emotional rumble strips, the same thing is important. If you've gotten out ahead of it so that, as you say, you're already tuned in, tapped in, turned on, then the rumble strip, it will just be a rumble strip. It won't take you off into the weeds right away. And so the way you prepare yourself emotionally is by acknowledging that Jerry and Esther always said, because they ate almost every meal in a restaurant, Esther still does nearly. And so there are often people around. And what they always said is they like happy noise. In other words, how often do you go to an outrageously noisy place because you like the energy of it? And you find yourself nearly shouting at each other even to communicate. And you're not standing on the tail and saying, hey, everyone, cut it out. I can't even hear what we're talking about over here. You just adjust your volume accordingly, and you kind of feel the energy of it. And because it's happy energy, wouldn't you rather go to a place like that than an old, quiet, dead-feeling place where you hear every clink of your fork on everything? And so if you go with the intention of feeling the happiness and then listen for the difference. If it's exuberance for life, never correct it. If it's happiness, joy, exuberance for life, when you say to someone, you are full of yourself, mean it in the most complimentary way. Because that's source energy pouring through in this moment, you see. And so as you think about it from that perspective, then you get yourself ready. And in that readiness, there's an ebb and flow that just feels